Again, my name's Henry Hahn, and I'm excited to talk to you about AWS CodeStar today, which is a new service that we introduced a few weeks ago that helps customers develop, build, and deploy applications on AWS. I'm going to give you some background, though, so let's do a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm first going to start out talking about the DevOps model. Many of you probably heard about that. I'm going to talk about what are the components of DevOps, why it's important, and what are the benefits that it gives us. And that'll lead us into some discussion about how we've adopted DevOps here at Amazon and some of the kind of the byproducts of that process in terms of the services and the DevOps portfolio that we've shipped that you as AWS customers can use. For anyone that's been working on software or even noticed software recently, it moves quickly, and it's been moving faster and faster every day. Customers demand changes. The ability to reach out and connect with those customers is larger than it's ever been before. You can end up making an application available as a small startup that reaches millions of customers in a single click, starting with very little capital or even funding, and that can grow. And even large enterprises understand that connecting with their customers need to move quickly to remain competitive. However, there are a lot of different factors that come into play when it comes to being agile and being able to deliver quickly. And what we found is that high-performing organizations do this much better. In particular, DevOps models help support faster deployment. What we found was these organizations were deploying not only faster and more frequently, but they had shorter lead times, they had fewer failures, and they were faster to recover. All of these are critical to that end-to-end process of delivering code and features to customers and ultimately closing the loop and gathering that feedback so that it can be repeated over and over to meet customer requirements. So I talked about DevOps, but I didn't give a definition. So I'm going to break this down a little bit and talk about what the different components of DevOps is. So I'll talk about this in three key categories. First, I'll talk about some of the cultural philosophies that DevOps is about. I'll talk about some of the practices that are used and ultimately some of the tools which will help us lead into our DevOps portfolio. So one of the biggest elements of the DevOps model is around teams and team responsibility and specifically shared responsibility. If you think about dev or development and ops or operations, there are some organizations that have these separated, where developers are working on code and operators may be maintaining infrastructure, actually performing the deployments. But what we found in the DevOps model is that sharing the responsibility across these two functions gives the teams the ownership to deliver on the results that they're after. If that's shipping faster, if that's higher availability, whatever it may be. In addition, as a part of that team orientation, having good visibility into the infrastructure and the application and being able to communicate about that are critical. And so that might mean good monitoring systems to understand how the overall system, the infrastructure and code are working together, and good tools for communication, whether that's direct communication within the team or tools for tracking issues that might arise so that they can be worked on and remediated over time. Again, I'd reiterate, this is really about closing the loop between the active development and delivering that code and that set of features, hearing from customers, understanding the customer impact or benefit, and addressing and improving over time. So we talked a little bit about the culture. Now there are a handful of practices that we've seen that really lead to this agility that you get from DevOps. One of the first is is really factoring your applications from monolithic apps that might be hard to maintain, hard to troubleshoot, hard to update, to more decoupled services, or what we call microservices, that are used together that make it more manageable to maintain and to update these services over time by the teams. In addition to making the actual code changes and updating the application, the actual process of delivering that code is critical as well. So if you've heard the term continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment, these are all part of the elements of delivering code to customers more quickly. You want automated, repeatable processes. That gives you availability, it gives you efficiency, it helps with your overall delivery velocity, and ultimately helps with reliability and availability, which results in better customer impact. Another DevOps practice that really comes with combining the development and operation together is how you manage your infrastructure. If you're using a model where you have operators that are managing the infrastructure separately than the code, you can end up with problems, whether through scaling or misconfigurations. But if you actually write your infrastructure as code, you actually maintain this gives you the ability to deploy changes just like you deploy your software, to make updates, to maintain your infrastructure, and as well have things like version control, which are best practices in development. So now we can actually move our entire application, not just the source and the source code and the build processes, but also the infrastructure that this runs on, into code. Now today we actually have a service that helps you do this if you're familiar with it. It's called AWS CloudFormation. And CloudFormation, we're actually looking at some CloudFormation here on the screen, is just a way to define what that infrastructure is and how it should be deployed. I'll finally highlight monitoring and logging. The entire process of delivering code starts with writing that code, deploying it, and then monitoring it over time. If you're working on services that need to be up 24/7, you need to understand how those services are doing and what the customer experience is. And that's where monitoring comes into place. Monitoring and sort of the corollary, the logging that goes with that, give you the ability to understand how your code changes are impacting your customers, how the service is performing, and if a problem does arise, gives you the ability to start troubleshooting and understanding how you can fix that problem so that you can have your services back up and running the way you want to as quickly as possible. So let me pull this kind of all together. We talked about these different components of DevOps, the DevOps culture, the DevOps practices. These ultimately give you better collaboration within the team, better delivery or more rapid delivery, higher reliability, not only from delivering the code, but the actual services running, better security, better scale, and better speed, both in terms of delivering features, but also the ability to be productive and efficient within your teams. So that's kind of how we think about DevOps. Now, a lot of this I'm talking about, but we have adopted most of these practices internally in various forms. Different teams have different decisions on how they adopt it. But I want to talk a little bit about the development process at Amazon and how we got to a place where we were using these more agile DevOps types of practices. So in 2001, we had larger, more monolithic architectures. So these are, as I mentioned, they're harder to maintain, they're a little bit less flexible. So that monolithic architecture sometimes reflected the organization hierarchically. And over time, we ended up decoupling that into microservices and what we call the two pizza teams. You may have heard this term before, but the basic idea is having teams that are sized in a way that you could feed them with two pizzas. That's about the right size that we found for maintaining the ability and agility to work in a DevOps model. So once we started understanding this microservices architecture, moving to this microservice architecture, things got a lot better. We were still, we're still working through the process of automation and releasing that software. And so we thought things could improve. So we actually ran a study to figure out where we might be able to improve. We wanted to find out how long specifically it takes to go from code check-in through code being available in production. That's kind of the ultimate measure. And so this includes the time it took to build, to test, and to deploy our software. And what we learned was that this was taking a long time, in some cases on the order of weeks. And we certainly didn't want it to take weeks to get code changes into production. As we dug into this, we actually discovered that our processes had a lot of human element to it, a lot of manual work. And that's where we were taking most of the time. Developers would use tickets or emails to track their release process. They would have a ticket or email other developers to run a build, at which point a bunch of requests would batch up before being run. Once that build was done, new tickets were cut to deploy the software. And so this perpetuated a lot of waiting. And so this was really the problem that we needed to solve. We were waiting hours. We needed to figure out how we could automate a lot of these processes so that developers weren't sitting around and waiting. So that led us to start building tools to solve these problems. And I'm going to talk more about the tools when I talk about the external services, but these tools were about supporting the DevOps model across Amazon. And as we saw those as best practices, we saw more teams adopt those. By 2014, we had thousands of service teams across Amazon that were using this model. We saw teams using microservices as a best practice. They were using continuous delivery, and they were managing this across even more environments that they had in the past. And in fact, in 2014, we had something like 50 million deployments. I mean, this is just an astonishingly large number. This probably wouldn't have been possible at the pace that we'd want it to happen without this DevOps model and the tools to do that. So we're here to talk about some of the AWS services that help you with the DevOps model, that help you take advantage of some of these processes. And I've just talked about a bunch of different details about DevOps, but we're going to jump into more details here about what you can start doing today so that you know where you can start. I'm going to start by giving you an overview of what the AWS services are that you can use. Today, we have 5 different services. I'm going to start with the 4 here that enable or are the tools as a part of this process. So we have AWS Code Pipeline, which is a release automation service. We have AWS Code Deploy, which helps customers deploy their code to servers. We have AWS Code Commit, which is our Git-based source repository service. And we recently introduced AWS Code Build, which is a managed build service that we run on your behalf against the source code you provide. Now I'm going to back up one step and talk about the overall process at a high level. So generally, the process looks like this. We have source, so some type of source control. And if I referred back to the previous slide, that would align to our code commit service. There's build. So after you have source, you build that source. So we have code build. There are ways that you can add tests to our code build service, unit tests, or you can do integration testing. We actually have a number of third-party tooling integrations that you can use. And then there's Code Deploy, which you can actually use Code Deploy to deliver your code to EC2 instances or your own on-premises servers. And this is all orchestrated with the AWS Code Pipeline service. So you can go into AWS Code Pipeline today and connect all these different elements to start with your own CI/CD processes. So that's kind of looking at the whole picture. And of course, one of the things that's not on this slide that we also provide is monitoring capabilities. And those monitoring capabilities vary across the different services that you end up deploying to, whether that's EC2 or Beanstalk or Lambda. Now, we have a lot of customers who have looked at these tools and have decided to use components of it. They've decided to use multiples of these services. But one of the bits of feedback that we heard was customers wanted to adopt DevOps models, but they weren't always sure how to get started, and beginning with 5 different services or 4 different services was a little bit overwhelming at times. And that's why we introduced AWS CodeStar. The idea behind AWS CodeStar was to really provide a quick way to develop, build, and deploy applications on AWS. What AWS CodeStar does is gives you the ability to get started on AWS developing a new project in just minutes. And that doesn't require that you already know all the ins and outs of all the services that are used underneath the covers. We help get you to a development project that gets you started and lets you learn the pieces that you need to learn over time. In addition, the DevOps model that we're using internally and we want to support is a team exercise. So AWS CodeStar actually includes a number of capabilities that are there to help you work with your development project, but also your team. And we wanted to make this software delivery easy. So we actually configure and provide everything needed for delivery. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the project templates that we have that let you quickly configure and choose the type of framework and languages that you want to run on top of. So what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to run through basically a demo of AWS CodeStar. So I'm just going to walk through these things. It might be easier than me talking all about it. So if you have already used CodeStar, you can go to the AWS console. You can go to console.aws.amazon.com/CodeStar to get started. But I'll go ahead and walk through this and I'll talk about those links at the end of this as well. So let's go ahead and if you visit the CodeStar console, you'll be introduced to this page here that just introduces you to some of the benefits. I'm just going to go ahead and click Start a Project. That's how you get started. Now, on top of providing all these capabilities, I mentioned these project templates. The project templates are a set of pre-configured frameworks, languages, and infrastructure configuration that you can choose based on your preferences to quickly get started. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll go ahead and say, click here, and maybe I'm a Node developer and I'm interested in looking at the Node packages that are available. I can quickly select some of these filters on the side. Now, these different packages include everything that you need to get started, and they also include that infrastructure, and they can deploy to, say, AWS Lambda, which is our serverless technology. You can deploy to Elastic Beanstalk, which is a managed application environment that runs on top of EC2 instances, or you can deliver directly to Amazon EC2 instances. I'm going to go ahead and choose running on AWS Lambda here. Once you've selected your project template, we give you the overview of what you're going to get in that template. So at this point, nothing has been kicked off, nothing has been started, but we kind of highlight the different components. We give you source control through AWS Code Commit. We give you build through AWS Code Build. You can also integrate your testing with Code Build as well. We give deploy capability, and in the case of Lambda, that uses a form of CloudFormation. I mentioned that earlier. And then finally, there is a monitoring integration as well. So you can keep an eye on how your application is doing. All you need to do here is just provide a project name. So I'm going to go ahead and I call this AWS SF Summit. That was actually the summit where we introduced CodeStar. I'm reusing this demo here. And all I need to do now is click Create Project. Now, one of the things I'll highlight is all those templates are designed to run in the AWS free tier. So that means most customers that are just starting with this will be able to run these applications without any type of charges. There's no charge for AWS CodeStar itself, just the underlying resources, and that includes your EC2 instance or your Lambda function executions. But those services include free tiers, and these templates are designed to be able to operate within those free tiers. Now, as my project's getting set up, one of the things that we help you do is connect to your source repository that we've set up. This template will include all those tools I mentioned, but it also includes a sample application. That sample application is stored in the AWS Code Commit source repository. And we let you actually edit your application using Visual Studio, Eclipse, or if you just want to use your own command line tools with a Git client, you can do that as well. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to click on the command line tools just to demonstrate what this looks like. We actually help you figure out what the specific commands are that you need to set up, and we give you all the instructions directly in the console, so there's no jumping out. I'll go ahead and scroll down here. So I, in this particular case, have selected the configuration to connect to my source repo using HTTPS on a Mac. And what we actually do is we give you the exact command that you need to run to clone your source repository locally. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to click this copy button and move this out of the way for a minute. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to a command line window. And I've got a local Git client already set up. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste that clone command that I just copied. I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And now what I've done is I've actually cloned this locally. I'm now connected to my source repo, and I'll be able to make source code changes as I work on my project. Now let's go ahead and jump back over to the console. Now at this point, you can kick off that project, or you've kicked off this project to be provisioning. And all that means is that we're creating all the pieces in the infrastructure that are needed for you to work on this application. So you can sit here and wait. Depends the duration of setup depends on the type of project you choose. But ultimately, it's somewhere between 2 and 8 minutes, depending on the specific configuration you chose. And at the end of that, what you've got is the CodeStar dashboard. This is the centralized view for your entire development project. And we include a number of different elements here, but the first thing that I'm going to highlight is we actually included a running application in this project for you. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go click on that and see what that application was. So here we go. This is the running sample application. In this particular case, it's a simple web application with a web page. Turns out we're actually using Lambda in the background to serve this up. But this entire process, as I've talked through that, is a slightly elongated version of how long it would really take you to have a development project up and running on AWS. And that's it. You've got a project running. Now I'm going to jump back over to the dashboard because we have quite a bit more on that dashboard that aligns with the tools and the services that we talked about earlier. So I'll scroll down here and you'll actually notice I've got this continuous deployment. So we've configured a continuous deployment tool chain for you in the project, which includes code pipeline, code commit source control, code build for build steps, and then ultimately the deploy step. In this case, we're using CloudFormation. None of that had to be configured by you. You saw everything that I did leading up to that, and you've got a tool chain. We've got another set of elements on here. You can see application activity. This is monitoring for errors and executions of the application. I've got one execution at this point. We have a summary tile for the code commit history. We'll talk about this JIRA tile a little bit later on. If I actually sit here long enough, you'll see that the code is actually working its way through the pipeline as well. Let me go back there. And that's ultimately what will get deployed. Now, let's see here. I'll scroll back up to the top. We have this sort of intro welcome tile. We have a team wiki tile. So a lot of things for you to explore here. Now, the first thing that I'm going to talk about is the application and how you update that application. So let me advance. So this was the application, and by the way, this is a screenshot, and the default application actually changes colors based on the time of the day. So it'll be different colors. We kind of did the sunset there. But this application is already running, but let's say that I wanted to make a small change to this. I'll go ahead and switch back over to my source control, my command line window. I'm going to go ahead and just do some local edits of some of those files. And so here I see the structure of my repo. I'm going to go ahead and edit. There's an index.html file that's in the public folder there. So let's go ahead and edit that. Now I've started farther down here, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to replace this header here. I'm just going to change what that text says. So this is my hello world change. Let's see here. Oops, sorry. Jumped the screen there. You can see that I've changed that H1 to my first AWS CodeStar application. All right. So basically, I'm done with the edits. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save that out. And now I'm going to add that. I've actually run that command already, git add. I've added that file. I'm actually going to push that, and I'll add a little comment there. Now, I've now committed that to my code commit source repository. So let's jump back over to the console again. Oh, sorry, I forgot to push it. Now I've actually pushed it to the code commit repository. Now let's jump back over to the console. What you'll start seeing as you make changes here is you'll see those commits starting to occur in this commit tile. So I've already made a bunch of changes to this, and that commit will actually trigger the release process so that code gets deployed. Now, if I actually wait for that deployment to complete, I'll see that my code change happened. And that's all I did. I wasn't touching any servers. I wasn't manually deploying code. This was all taken care of for me with that toolchain automation. All right, so that's a simple code change. And again, as I'm walking through this, you can see we've been walking through this demo for a few minutes. This is about how long it would take you to start one of these projects on your own. Now, in the DevOps model, remember we talked about this collaborative and shared ownership. So when I'm working on a development project, I'm probably interested in others working on it with me. Let's go ahead and get started in here. On the side, you'll see there's a team icon. I'm going to go ahead and click on that team icon. And this brings us to the CodeStar project team management page. Now, what we've done here is we've made it possible for you to add team members, both inside and outside the organization, without having to worry about the specific permissions that are used under the covers. This team management, the permission management capability is built on our identity and access management service, IAM. Now, if you're using IAM, you know it's very powerful. It lets you configure different permissions across different services. But if you're just getting started, that can end up being a little bit overwhelming at times. And that flexibility can end up being a little bit confusing. So what we've done is we've actually created a interface that simplifies that process specifically for your code project. So I'll go ahead and click Add Team Member here. And I'm going to come over here. And I can come in here and I can add others that are part of my CodeStar projects. So I've got Jane Dev here, or other identities within my account, the IAM account users that I can add. Or I can even create a new IAM user if this is somebody that doesn't exist yet in this account. And I'm actually going to go ahead and say create new IAM user. And what I can do here is I can go ahead and fill in this information. I'll give them a username. This will be the IAM username that they have, a display name. That's how they'll show up to others in this CodeStar project. I can add an email, and then I can set their role type at the end. So let's go ahead and set their role type. We have 3 role types, and there's a viewer, which is a read-only mode. We have contributors, which is they can contribute source code, they can make changes to the project. And then we have owners, and owners are like contributors, except they have the ability to go and add other users. So I'm gonna make Jane a contributor for now. Now, when I hit that create button, let me actually back up here. When I create this create button, what we're doing is we're creating the IAM user, and we actually interface with the IAM page to let you set up that user without going to the IAM console on your own and trying to figure out. So all you have to do is hit create user. That user is created. Now, for a new user, I've created Leo here. You will need to provide them with their password and any credentials that you're going to give them here. So this is an important step. But once you're done, we'll take you directly back to CodeStar. And you'll actually see that I've now added that user to my project as a contributor. And that's it. There's one other little field here. If you've got a project that uses EC2 hosts, or it uses your own server that you want to SSH into, you can control the SSH permissions to those hosts as well through this panel. And I can, as myself, I can add a public SSH key that is my own key. I can also grant others the permissions to be able to SSH in, and they can provide their own key. So a little extra help there in managing your overall project. All right, let's go and talk about issue management. Now, up to this point, we've talked about the overall project, we've talked about the tool chain, the different project templates. Part of the overall development process is working the code through that pipeline, but also maintaining and tracking either issues that occur that you need to follow up on, or even use for planning. So we have actually integrated with Atlassian JIRA to work with CodeStar. And we're gonna get into a little bit more detail here at the end, but JIRA is here to help with collaboration across your entire team. So everyone has the same view of the work that needs to be done, or the projects that are ongoing, or the issues that are being tracked. So there's a single source of truth across this dev cycle. And what's great about this is this scales from one person, the smallest team, all the way up to tens and hundreds of users. So this is a great scalable solution to help with issue management. So I'm going to walk through real quickly how you'd go and set up Atlassian JIRA within CodeStar. So you'll see this JIRA tile in the bottom here. You can also find it through extensions. I'll go ahead and click the connect button here. Now, if you recall at the beginning, I showed how you could connect to your source repo using some inline or in-browser instructions. We do the same thing for JIRA setup. So in this setup process, we're actually going to, I'm going to give the URL to my JIRA cloud instance in this particular case that I've already got set up. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you can get that set up for yourself later on. But I'll go ahead and provide that. And by hitting next, we're going to provide customized instructions for you to connect to JIRA. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these, but if you've seen OAuth type of integrations before, there is an OAuth type of connection that you make. Go ahead and hit connect. And here I now have JIRA issues inside of my my CodeStar project. And you can look at individual issues. You can open up JIRA and see all the capabilities there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually hand this off to Stephen Henderson from Atlassian, and he's going to give you a little bit more detail about how you can take advantage of JIRA Software Cloud.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm Stephen Henderson. I'm doing a bunch of DevOps evangelism for Atlassian these days, and I'm really, really excited to be talking about CodeStar and JIRA today. Let's see if I can share my screen. Great. And so here is that dashboard that I mentioned a moment ago. And we can see things like the commits that have been going on. I can see the deployment status. I can see what code pipeline's been doing for me. And of course, I can see what JIRA has to say about what I might want to be paying attention to. From right within this dashboard, I can do things like select the project that I'm working on, filter down to interesting subsets that are relevant to me, for example. I could choose just the stuff that I'm assigned to, or maybe some work that hasn't been assigned to anybody yet. I can switch between the sprints that I might be interested in. Like maybe I want to look back in history and see what was done last sprint that maybe needs to be addressed now, or what needs to be done in this sprint. In this case, I went ahead, while Henry was kind of showing us the magic of that demo application, I decided to go ahead and spin one up myself. And thanks to the dashboard, I can click on this and I can see this is what that demo application, in this case, it's an Express, an Node.js Express app. I went ahead and added this little bold text here, and it turns out that was the wrong thing to do. It's not supposed to be bold, and someone has filed a JIRA issue for me to work on, and so why don't I get started with that? So I can see that this is something I should be working on, and just in the interest of time, I'm going to make that happen. So if I do, I went ahead and made the code change while you guys were talking with Henry. So I'm going to commit that.
So as I was saying, it turns out that there was an issue with that simple little application that I created. It was using some formatting that wasn't approved by someone important, I guess. So what we did was, I found out about it by looking at the JIRA widget here inside of the dashboard. Something's been assigned to me to fix that body copy. So it was a pretty straightforward fix, if you can imagine, and it is all kind of demo world stuff, so you'll forgive me. And at this point, I'll push that change. And thanks to the magic of CodeStar, I'll wind up with a nice continuous deployment loop where my change will eventually make it into an environment where we can test it. So we'll take that for granted, again, in the interest of time, and just kind of take a few more steps into what this integration looks like and why it's so helpful. So as I mentioned, I did discover here in the CodeStar dashboard itself that there was some work for me to be kind of paying attention to. It turns out to be this issue number 24. If I had found some issues, it would have been easy for me to create new issues from directly within the dashboard here. So that's a feature that is, at your fingertips. And of course, if we need to dive into the issue, get more detail, or if we want to gain a broader picture of how that issue fits into the overall release schedule, the sprint, or if we're doing a Kanban methodology, for example, we may want to see the board. So how do we get there from here? It's just a click away. So for example, let's start with the issue that I worked on. One click, and I'm here inside of JIRA. I didn't have to go hunting around for a URL or a bookmark. It was just waiting for me. And at this point, I can kind of mark that either as in progress or even done. And the right thing will happen. Let's see how that looks on our sprint board. And so we can see that the other issues here, the body copy should not be bold, is now in progress. And my whole team can see that. Let's actually go a little further and just make that finished. So now the team is aware of what's going on. And as we look at other things like burn down reports or cumulative flow diagrams, that is all updated. If I want to take a look at a dashboard that gives me kind of a master level overview of the project, I can see that very easily as well, and it's all up to date. And of course, eventually you'll see CodeStar is doing its magic and deploying the application so that we can see the change itself. Ultimately, the most important thing that I'll leave you with here is that with the power and the capability to deploy all these microservices up to 50 million times a year, I think was the number I heard earlier, it becomes all the more important that we're coordinating what's going on, what is the value of all of this work, and how can we track to make sure that from a DevOps standpoint, we are monitoring the flow of value through the system that is creating and deploying that value in a way that's visible, accurate, timely, and easy for everyone so that they have the right information at the right moment in that process and they aren't being distracted by things that aren't necessarily as critical. Figuring out how to kind of lean out the relationship between the people using the software, using CodeStar, using JIRA, getting work done, and how they actually get that stuff deployed is where we're focused right now. And I think that the integration between these two things is just an amazing step in the right direction. So for sure, I would encourage everyone, if you've not experienced JIRA at all, working with CodeStar is a great way to get started with JIRA because we have a special offer where up to 5 users can work for free inside of an instance. So you should find out more about that at the CodeStar page, and just I'd encourage you to get involved.
Great, thank you for that demo, Stephen, of Atlassian JIRA. I'm going to go ahead and we're almost finished up here, but I wanted to highlight That is a free offer for a 5-person license of JIRA Software Cloud that you can get when you use AWS CodeStar. You can kind of see the little graphic there, but when you're configuring when you're configuring JIRA inside CodeStar, there's a link at the top that will say try JIRA for free. You click on that and you set up your trial of JIRA there, and that's how you redeem the offer. So go ahead and try that out today. All right, last little bit of information before questions. You can get started with CodeStar by visiting the CodeStar console directly. That's console.aws.amazon.com/CodeStar. And if you're just interested in learning more about CodeStar, you can check out our details page, aws.amazon.com/CodeStar. I want to thank everybody today for joining us and looking forward to you trying the product out. Thank you.